Well, the night has come and gone. Crosby fucking Thorne returned. The Stargazers are now the USW Tag Team Champions, and a lot of people hate me now. I'm Zach Hardy from the Wrestle Target, and this is what just happened at USW's Hellfire 2018 pay-per-view. We started on the pre-show, of course, Weiler versus Seth. What was the result? I think Seth won. I'm pretty sure Seth won. That's what I have written down. So Seth won this match. Nevertheless, I wasn't finding myself very enthused by the entire match as it may be. I've taken this approach now in which, since I always tend to be home on Sundays now, especially since it's football season, I end up just not paying very much attention to the show or to the matches that I can see before I go out to perform. So I end up watching everything in full, sometimes, most oftentimes, knowing who won and who lost. But I watch everything full the night after when it gets put on pay-per-view, and well, I couldn't find myself very enthralled with the overall product as a whole. I mean, not necessarily just the product, but the fact of the matter is Weiler and Seth has been kind of very watered down since March, or at least since the seeds were planted for this feud in March, and then obviously April's technical issues probably plagued one of the most promising points of the card from the opening bell. And so when it came down to the remainder of the year being heavily focused with these two in Seth versus Weiler, Weiler versus Seth, yada yada yada, no DQ, no countout, steel cage, so on and so forth, I just couldn't find myself enthralled with it. You know, I think if they had an opportunity, I think if they had a real shot at, doing something at Call to Greatness, then a lot of people would have been able to take this feud a lot more seriously going down the line. But here you see it still going on, 6 months later, and it's on the pre-show. You can tell you kind of fell flat with it somewhere. Nevertheless, Seth won this match. He's a part of the Vigilante group, and we'll get to them later on in the night, of course, with the whole conclusion to the show. So, just know that he's kind of in a mode where he can go on and do something new, and I think Weiler has something interesting planned as well. That doesn't work at all. We go to the second pre-show match, and the second pre-show match are the Martin Brothers versus MP45 in a no-countout match. Now, we've been hinting at it, we've been saying it for quite a while now, probably over a year and a half now, or at least ever since the Martin Brothers came over to the Intensity brand. It was only a matter of time before they split up. And since we've been saying this for a year and a half, we'll probably be still saying this a year and a half later when we're still waiting for it to happen. Nevertheless, over the past couple of months, most heavily over the past couple of months, but also in little segments, rare brief intervals over the past year and a half, Georgie Martin, and Alex Martin have been kind of at odds, at each other's throats a little bit. It's like the escalation of 1 to 2 to 3, then you jump to a 5, then a 6, then a 7, then a 9. But before you get to that breaking point, you kind of just let everything go. You walk into another room, you let your head settle, you stab your wall a bunch of times, and you call it a day, you hug and make up, which is what they've been doing for the past year and a half. But nevertheless, it seems evident more so now than I would even argue to say ever since they started being a team again, that the seeds have been planting for a future breakup. And since this feud originally started out with MP45 facing the Martin Brothers because they felt like the Martin Brothers were in shambles and they wanted a way to be able to get into talked about tag team championship picture contenders, I can see that rubbing the Martin Brothers the wrong way, but I can see them losing to the team that insulted them in such a demoralizing way to be one of the final nails in the coffins, especially now that Kevin Storm is over on Severity and the Promised Land of Tanner Wallace and Suzuki Kirikashi are rumored to be coming over to Intensity this Wednesday. I would assume now that the rumor being that either George or Alex Martin will turn against the other and side with this new Promised Land, which I guess will be continuing onwards even without Blaine North and Samuel North. I would assume that would probably kick off around Bulletproof or a couple of weeks before that, and probably set up Alex Martin and George Martin as a marquee matchup on Bulletproof. Nevertheless, the show has been kind of plagued since the start, as Rank Hills versus Benny Franklin was a big plan. They originally had the plan for Eli Kaner to cash in or utilize his key and case opportunity at the Bulletproof pay-per-view, but nevertheless, I digress. Let's get out of the pre-show and into the main show. We start out in the main show with a very, I don't want to say meaningless match, because it feels like they put a lot more effort into this match than they did, hell, even Benny Franklin and Dustin Raymond, which came a few matches later in the card. But it was Derek Carter versus Prophecy, and it played a little bit of a role, but it felt just like filler. Now, the story behind this match was the fact that Prophecy was a part of this vigilante group with Anarchy and Seth and Chain Reaction and the Stargazers, and Derek Carter was one of the people that got hit by it the most. They took up a lot of spots that Derek Carter has been fighting to get the right to, or the rights to, since the start of the year, or even since before the start of the year. So I guess he absolutely felt a little bit wrong, but I think it was more so when Prophecy and Anarchy started attacking him when he least expected it. You know, in a match with Anarchy, he'd get attacked by Prophecy. He eventually got Anarchy suspended, but Anarchy ended up getting reinstated, and he was in corner for this match, which led to Derek Carter eventually submitting to Prophecy and the limb lock to give Prophecy the big victory over Derek Carter, which I think was much needed, especially seeing that Anarchy, Prophecy, and an individual you will hear about later on in the review if you haven't watched the show, are slotted up to be the main three generals of this vigilante group and this vigilante effort of sorts. We move on to what I would say would be the second least enthralling match on the card, which was Sasha Alexander versus Peyton Hawthorne. I like Peyton Hawthorne. She's a very unique individual. I think she brings a lot to the table that just kind of fits. She's an individual that you take seriously, but at the same time can very easily hate as quickly as you can love. It's kind of like whatever she does, if she starts smiling, you start laughing, or not laughing, I'm sorry, that's a wrong word. If she starts smiling, you start cheering, and if she starts getting angry, you start booing. It's kind of a case of you just ride along with whatever the hell she feels like. So she's kind of in this interesting role where she's in an overwhelmingly heel role right now, but instead of changing up that to kind of give it a character in itself, USW's management team kind of plays their cards correctly with having her still be booked like a heel, but continue doing what she's been doing over the past couple of weeks, which is just kind of play onto the role of she's a bad person, but at the same time she'll do something in the middle of a match or in a promo to get the crowd cheered up, or to get the crowd fired up is the better way to say it, and not know why she's being cheered. So I think that's fantastic, and her beating Sasha Alexander tonight at Hellfire was a fantastic way to continue getting people to care about her, and I think the more you continue to give her these little wins, the easier it will be to see Peyton Hawthorne versus Cindy Allison Jackson as a marquee match on a pay-per-view, or a Peyton Hawthorne versus Haley Osser, or a Peyton Hawthorne versus Jade Oliver, or hell, even a Peyton Hawthorne versus Alicia Sinclair for the Women's Championship. If you keep building it up properly, I think they'll do great things. Sasha Alexander, on the other hand, has been working with a slow calf injury. She kind of had to fill out a few dates with USW before she went on a sabbatical with healing up her injury, so we can expect to see her back probably early next year, February or March, now that she's done with her dates with USW. But nevertheless, Peyton Hawthorne gets the win. Peyton Hawthorne gets the win over Sasha Alexander to kind of boost her stock up a little bit more. Now we get into, I guess, what would be the other match on the card, which was Benny Franklin versus Dustin Alexander. Now, there was a lot of speculation as to, and it kind of boggles my mind. I get it, because Ezra Hills was expected to be out for 9 to 10 months with that injury from a couple of months ago. But then the doctors stated that he'd be ready 6 to 7 months past the original injury date, and he's just been tearing it up in rehab. So with that, a lot of people were concerned at the idea of him being able to kind of rehab so much that he could come back at Hellfire and cost Benny Franklin the match. And to add, I guess to add a little bit more fire to that stupid flame, people assumed, or people started thinking, oh, his recovery time's getting boosted, quicker and quicker. Perhaps this is what USW's way of pushing him back into the picture. Maybe that accident wasn't an accident at all. For starters, it was. I can tell you that much for sure. But for a second, he's not Superman. He's not going to regenerate bone marrow, and he's not going to regrow bones within 2 to 3 months, or just immediately, so that way he can cost Benny Franklin a meaningless match against Dustin Raymond. I can see the confusion over there, because especially since it is a meaningless match with Dustin Raymond, as I adjust my crotch. But at the same time, while you can assume that because it's a meaningless match, that automatically means that something notable has to take place, or at least you can assume that, you can't really jump to the idea that Ezra Hills will be involved. There was a big speculation as to whether Crosby Thorne would get involved with the Red Belt Championship picture or not, but I would say that even without that being the case, it would be more realistic to expect Crosby Thorne to return and fight Benny Franklin in some way than Ezra Hills to regrow injury or rehab injuries in the sound of a snap to interfere in a meaningless match. Nevertheless, Benny Franklin gets the win over Dustin Raymond with the... I forgot what he called. Nevertheless, he gets the win via pinfall, so Benny Franklin continues onwards from there. Now, the final non-championship match from USW's Hellfire 2018 pay-per-view was Haley Osser versus Her Equinox. Now, Her Equinox has been an interesting individual since her signing to USW back in February and her debut in May. There was a very heavy call for her, and a lot of fans beckoned for her to get involved in the World Championship picture out of the bat, even after Alicia Sinclair was put on the Intensity roster, and Her Equinox was taken a couple of rounds afterwards in that original draft piece. People still wanted and clamored for Her Equinox to become the women's champion. And then, of course, she had the deal with the DWI, and when that whole thing fizzled out or whatever, she ended up getting into just some personal drama, and now she's here. She was involved in a feud with with Haley Osser, and I guess the USW is still really high on her, and the fans are absolutely really high on her as well. When she debuted a couple of weeks ago, maybe 6 weeks ago, she was over as hell. It was the biggest pop of the night. Her Equinox everybody exploded. They wanted to see her succeed, and I think USW realizes that. And I know they want to give her a chance, and I know they want to give her a fair shot to succeed. So I'm hoping that she can keep everything together in what is essentially right now the biggest opportunity of her life and run with it. She gets a win over Haley Osser, who has been booked incredibly strategically. I don't remember telling you about any of this in the reviews, but beforehand, a couple of months ago, she lost a match on Intensity that the stipulation was if she lost the match, she could not challenge for the USW Women's Championship until after 2018 came to a close. Now, this was like June, July, perhaps, so the seeds have been planted for her to kind of have a slow burn towards not only when she could challenge, or not only challenging for the title, but towards when she could challenge for the title. It's gotten to the point now where people are literally commenting down the days until Haley Osser gets the championship shot. Now it got to the point in which there was a little number with a hashtag in the corner with just the number while Haley Osser was on screen of days left before she can challenge for the championship. Now, I know a couple of months ago there was a lot of talk as to who could dethrone Alicia Sinclair as the USW Women's Champion, and now I know that there's a lot of speculation with both divisions. There's the case of, okay, is Aphrodite going to lose the World's Women's Championship to Natalie Dawson, Margot Silva, Taylor Hell? It looks like Taylor Hell could be the case in 2 weeks at Brimstone. She is extremely over, but nevertheless, you've got the same kind of thing here now. You had Cindy Allison Jackson could do it. Her Equinox could do it when she got here. Now Peyton Hawthorne's kind of being built up into that role. Jade Oliver is extremely, brutal and gritty and down to the bone. I want to succeed at all costs. And now you have Haley Osser kind of have that slow burn, and it's lovely being able to have 3, 4, 5, 6 individuals that can take the championship off at the right time. It's great to see long thought out storylines, even if they're obvious, like Dwayne Porter having the Blue Belt Championship, and the case being Tyreek Carver has to come back and beat him to regain the championship. But nevertheless, it's great when you see that in the case of if Dwayne Porter were to be defending the title against Tyreek Carver and Mr. Anthony and Simon Saint and Hearn Astley and Philip Akron, all of these individuals that had the chance equally to take down Tyreek Carver. That's just a wonderful thing to have when you have options that don't just make it extremely predictable. So Her Equinox beats Haley Osser to pick up the win and hopefully regain momentum. We'll see what happens following from here. Next, we'll go into the Blue Belt Championship match, and this was a fantastic match, honestly, in my opinion. The only reason I talk about it now is because the Red Belt Championship had a big, noteworthy position that it was in. The USW Tag Team Championships had a shocker in the match. The women's championship, I can't really start out with that because it's like that was a fantastic meeting between two individuals that were highly touted, and you already know, as I said in the intro, why the main event has to kind of be talked about in detail, but the Blue Belt Championship match was between Dwayne Porter and Mr. Anthony. As I stated, Tyreek Carver and Dwayne Porter have this feud, so it was very unlikely to see Mr. Anthony pick up the Blue Belt Championship tonight. It didn't happen, obviously, but he had a great performance. Now, a lot of people expected him to have a great performance to be able to say, hey, I may not be the Blue Belt champion, but I absolutely can show you how I stand as much of a chance as Tyreek Carver and Simon Saint and Dustin Raymond, Philip Akron, Hernastley, so on and so forth. So that was lovely to see Mr. Anthony, hold his weight on his own. He held his weight on his own at Call to Greatness in the USW Championship match. He held his own on a great Red Belt Championship run that brought a lot of prestige to the championship. And now I look at Mr. Anthony and say, I think he's a very valuable contender and a very viable contender for the Blue Belt Championship. Nevertheless, Dwayne Porter wins with the porthole via pinfall to retain the Blue Belt Championship, and now we're on to Bulletproof 11, and we got to see what he does at that pay-per-view, because I don't know. You can understand that Tyreek Carver is obviously fighting to take the title back from Dwayne Porter, and there are only two real big stages that you can do it at, Call to Greatness and Bulletproof, so perhaps if it happens at Bulletproof, we'll be shocked. If it doesn't happen at Bulletproof, it'll absolutely happen at Call to Greatness nevertheless. But, that continues onwards. I guess we talk about the USW Tag Team Championship match, because I guess it's probably the least technical thing to talk about, or thing to run around. The Marvelous Brothers in Arms of Gringo and Fernandez defend against the Stargazers, who are obviously a part of the Vigilante group. The Stargazers have just had a great year. They were brought into USW at the beginning of 2017. The company did nothing with them, and they took it upon themselves to just, I'm going to go put on a great match, and when these people cheer, I'm going to come back, and you better have something to do for me. Sound good? All right, great. And they've been doing that since the beginning of the year. They've been extreme number one contenders for the titles, and while people hate the fact that they are aggravating individuals, it's like anybody you root for, it doesn't matter whether it's American Alpha in their NXT days, the Revival in their NXT days, the Ascension in their NXT days, the New Day in their heel phase, Sheamus and Cesaro, the Young Bucks, the Briscoe brothers, the Motor City Machine Guns, OVE, it doesn't matter who it may be. If you love a team, if you love an individual or a performer so much, they are going to find a way to fuck you over and to ensure that that individual or performers or individuals do not walk away with a win. And they did that just here. The only difference is they actually walked out as the new USW Tag Team Champions. So when it came down to it, it's something that people have been clamoring for since 2017, or at least to give them a real shot. And they had a couple of shots against the Martin Brothers, against MP45, against the Marvelous Brothers in Arms. They put on fantastic matches, stellar matches ever since then, and it's just fantastic to see them pick up a win. It's refreshing because they really deserve it, and they have earned it and proved that they have earned it countless times. So I'm very happy to see them take the titles. Next up is the USW Women's Championship match. Alicia Sinclair defends her championship against Cindy Allison Jackson, or CAJ. Everybody loves Cindy Allison Jackson. She's like if Bayley was done on the main roster correctly, but in less of a happy-go-lucky kind of way. Cindy Allison Jackson is just somebody you really want to root for, because you want to see her succeed. She doesn't go down. She doesn't, stop fighting. The only time she'll tap out is when she knows there's no hope and she has to live to fight another day, and then that day will come, and then she will kick ass. She will rinse everybody. And that happened to be the case at USW Hellfire. Cindy Allison Jackson came with everything. Guns, fire, steamboats, tugboats, fucking naval ships, warhammers, dive bombers, fucking everything. And she won. And Cindy Allison Jackson beat Alicia. And Cindy Allison Jackson beat Alicia Sinclair. But the ruling was that Alicia Sinclair beat Cindy Allison Jackson to retain the USW Women's Championship. I'll tell you why. In classic Dusty finish sort of way, everything looked towards Cindy Allison Jackson on a roll-up. Also, I shouldn't really say Sinclair beat Jackson, but it looked like everything was great. Cindy Allison Jackson was on top of Alicia Sinclair. The three was counted, and the referee called for the bell, but as everybody assumed that Cindy Allison Jackson had won, and everybody popped, not thinking for a second it was going to happen at Hellfire, the ring announcer stated that, as declared by the referee, your match has currently ended in a draw, as neither performer had their shoulders off of the mat. So it was a double finish, or it was a Dusty finish, and a double pin, which meant that it was a draw, and the champion retains via rule, so Alicia Sinclair walked out, still the USW Women's Champion. I mentioned the slow burn with Haley Osser, and continuing that into 2019, I think if Cindy Allison Jackson is not the individual to take the championship off of Alicia Sinclair's shoulders, then all hell better fucking break loose at that sighting immediately. So Alicia Sinclair lives to fight another day as USW Women's Champion, and Cindy Allison Jackson is now more over than I think she's ever been. So that's a very great sign. The Red Belt Championship picture now, or championship match now, is a hefty one to talk about, as it featured a lot. Chain Reaction's open challenge to any and everyone that wanted a shot at him or the Red Belt Championship. Crosby fucking Thorne returned, and Chain Reaction still fucking beat Crosby fucking Thorne. You can't write this shit, guys. Well, you kind of can. It is pro wrestling. Nevertheless, Chain Reaction walks out, starts running the ropes. Lights go down, lights come back up, it's fucking pearl white bright in the fucking room, in the fucking arena, nevertheless. And then immediately, lights start kind of breaking apart, you see sort of like technical difficulties, then the pearl lights come back, and then little colorful bars start rolling through the Titantron or Motiontron, and then you hear Crosby Thorne's theme song play, and everybody loses their fucking shit. It is a headbanger of a song to listen to, but at the same time, when you're in Atlantic City with most likely an arena of a third of individuals completely fucking inebriated, you're at the point where headbanging becomes trampling over everybody and the barricade itself. I think 3 individuals were headbanging so badly they had to be escorted over the barricade again because they fell over the fucking barricade while Crosby Thorne was making his entrance ramp or entranceway. So if you're a professional wrestler, if you're a professional wrestling booker and you want to ensure that a lot, and I mean a lot of individuals are put on notice, play something that will make them want to jump into the fucking ceiling and splat back onto the seat that they purchased earlier in the night. Crosby Thorne comes down, accepts the match. Match goes on for like a good 20-25 minutes. Much more competitive than anybody thought. And Crosby Thorne goes for the Thorn Bush until Chain Reaction goes for the Chain Link, locks it in, and picks up the pinfall victory over Crosby Thorne to a big surprise. A lot of people thought that even as the match went on and progressed even further, that Chain Reaction would still end up losing in some way. Of course, Crosby Thorne would find a solution, but that didn't happen. And Chain Reaction looks extremely strong now that he has beaten Crosby Thorne without even knowing that he was going to be facing Crosby Thorne, and we'll always be able to say that. So Chain Reaction retains the Red Belt Championship, and we continue on in this story, and I'm looking forward to seeing where this goes. Main event time, main event for the USW Championship, Zach Hardy versus James, as James defends the USW Championship against Zach Hardy. It was a fucking 50-minute match. I think the momentum may have turned like 7 times, as I saw, and for a fucking big moment, you had things like James trying to do a springboard back-seated springboard elbow and completely whiffing and hitting or going right through the commentary table. You had James suplexing Zach Hardy off of the barricade and onto the steel steps that hurt like a motherfucker. I'm still kind of limping to an extent. And at the same time, you had everything from outside ring work or ringside work. You had ground and pound, you had technical wrestling, you had high-flying wrestling, big moves that both performers bring out. You see James with the shooting star press, you see Zach Hardy with the 450 splash. Both individuals did their versions of the senton bomb. It was just a great match overall. And then the conclusion of the match came when Zach Hardy countered the sideways from James to a break over the knee. He had been favoring the knee for the majority of the match. It had been kind of a commonplace. He went to go for the Hardy face plant. Knee kind of buckled out. James went for the sideways, hit the sideways, set up for the midways. Hardy went for the discus lariat out of nowhere. James countered with a roll through DDT before hitting Hardy with the midway to win the match and retain the USW Championship. So obviously a lot of aggression in the air. James beats Zach Hardy again. Zach Hardy loses to James again. And then the Vigilante group come out from the crowd. The Vigilante group comes down from the upper seats. And as soon as they hop over the barricade, a litany of the roster comes out, such as Derek Carter, Dustin Raymond, Philip Akron. You got fucking Kevin Storm still there. Excuse me. MP45. And even fucking Roseline comes down to try to halt the Vigilante group from doing anything, but by the time they get down to the ring, the Vigilante group have already gotten in the ring and still technically outnumber them. So it comes down to a point where they're kind of focusing on James and on the individuals on the outside of the ring, and James starts screaming at Zach Hardy to get them down and to tell them to stop. He ends up shoving Zach Hardy down and into the corner. The Vigilante group then turn towards James and starts circling the shark. James then turns around and Zach Hardy makes him eat a super kick as everybody kind of gasps for shock, but at the same time like, oh, I can't believe it. And then the outside individuals, Philip Akron and Kevin Storm and so on and so forth, just like, hey, what? Why? And then Hardy just, I guess, looks down at James, and every individual looks at Hardy, and then obviously Anarchy gives Zach Hardy the iron crowbar, Cecilia as I call her, wink, wink, and just kind of walks around James, doesn't know what to do, looks at the individuals, looks at James. He looks down at James, goes, you made me do this, looks to the individuals on the outside and said, I had nothing to do with them until now, so if you want to complain, I'll give you something to complain about. Sets up and completely cracks James over the top of the skull with Cecilia and the iron crowbar before kind of dropping it to his pocket, putting it on his belt loop, and standing in the center of the ring as the Vigilante group stand by him. He looks back and forth at the Vigilante group and just looks up at the camera kind of like all out of it and out of the mindset and with very little to no emotion, and just does this. And everybody tags along in doing so. And Zach Hardy turns heel. Heel turn, Zach Hardy heel turn. We haven't seen Hardy the individual turn heel since 2014 with the Enigma character, unless you count his tweener kind of ish runs. But we haven't seen a heel Zach Hardy. We saw a heel Enigma, but we haven't seen Zach Hardy as a heel under the Zach Hardy name since 2008, which is when he first started out. I keep using myself in third person, get used to it if you're just new here. So this is a big moment, of course, because it shows the evolution, and I think in a number of years we'll look back at this and see it for what it is. We'll see it as kind of like a passing of the torch. James came in and took over the way Hardy took over back in 2008, and as Hardy relegated Sunkiss to being kind of this individual that had to feed off of his own success rather than the crowd's admiration, we see that happen with Zach Hardy 10 years later with James, and I think this will end up, we'll look back at this and see it as a genuine passing of the torch from one side of the spectrum to the other. And I really enjoy that because it's something that we can, it's like, it's like Eddie Guerrero being split open horribly. I mean, he nicked an artery, not a vein, but nevertheless, he was split open horribly in his match against JBL at the Great American Bash, or Judgment Day. It was one or the other. And we look back on that pay-per-view with that big, noteworthy moment. I think if we look back at Hellfire 2018 and 2020, 2021, 2022, we'll look back at it as a pay-per-view in which the kind of closing off of the show signified the era of wrestling for USW that we will be in that moment. And I think it'll be a moment in which Zach Hardy is an individual that kind of strives off his own success, and James is again a incredibly over individual, and that is USW Hellfire 2018 in a nutshell. It was a really great show. It was a really enjoyable show. It had a lot of these little tidbits, planted in from what I hope is the final seeds for the George Martin, Alex Martin eventual split. The Stargazers finally conquering all the odds and beating out the Marvelous Brothers in Arms to retain the USW, to capture the USW Tag Team Championships. Her Equinox finally picking up the much-needed first big win of her career against Haley Osser. Peyton Hawthorne getting a nice little win. Crosby Thorne's return and Chain Reaction's overcoming of the odds. Mr. Anthony being able to prove that he can hang in there with everybody and the best. And obviously then Zach Hardy turning heel and having a changing of the guards overall. So again, really enjoyable pay-per-view. I really liked watching it, performing at it. It was tons of fun, and it was a pay-per-view that I think absolutely was worth the money that you'd spent. I think it was worth the $19.99 to rent and the extra $5 to own. It was just a really good show, very noteworthy, and I would love to hear your reactions or your thoughts on it. What did you think of the show? Did you like it? Did you hate it? Were you kind of fairly in the middle? Did you like what was done? Did you not like what was done? Do you think some things could have been different? How would you have changed them? Send it off in the comments down below if you have any thoughts on the show. But with that being said, I'm Zach Hardy from the Wrestle Target. You can find me on Twitter at ZACHARYSERRA. You can find me on Instagram at THEZACKHARDY. And you can obviously find me here on YouTube, youtube.com/UNITARDZZ. With that being said, I hope you enjoyed. Like, comment, and subscribe for more. I am Zach Hardy. I'm signing off.